continue now with the reactions following yesterday's announcement on the Level 4 lockdown. Martin Kingston is chair of the Steering Committee of Business for South Africa, and he joins us now. Very good afternoon to you, Mr. Kingston, and thank you for your time today. Your reaction as business following the President's announcement last night, I'm sure it does go without saying that perhaps some of those announcements were somewhat expected from your side.
Yes, Tammy, good afternoon to you and your viewers. We were indeed anticipating an announcement along the lines that the President made last night. We think it's correct and appropriate under the circumstances. We had engaged with government previously and advocated for many of the measures that were announced, mindful, of course, that there are going to be impacts on certain sectors of the economy, particularly the tourism, leisure and hospitality industry. But in the face of the third wave, we really have absolutely no choice as a country but to take the measures that were announced yesterday.
It sounds like businesses were still struggling to recover from the previous waves and the lockdown. How then do you believe you will fare in this new environment?
Well, first of all, we don't know how long this lockdown is going to carry on. We certainly learned many lessons from our experience last year, from March of last year, where we went into level 5 lockdown and then throttled back eventually to level 1. And I believe that we have been able to adjust to be able to cope better with the circumstances than was previously the case. And I think the regulations are more appropriate and fit for purpose than they were when we started on this journey a year ago. Having said that, there are certain sectors, particularly those with many small and medium-sized enterprises and individuals, where we believe that the government will have to come back into the room to talk about what forms of relief are available, and we've already reached out to government to try and have that discussion as soon as practically possible. We certainly know that although the President has identified that this current phase is for 2 weeks, he indicated equally that we'll have to reassess the situation and determine whether or not the restrictions should be maintained, whether they should be relaxed, or indeed even strengthened. And so we must assume that this third wave is going to be with us for some time, particularly with the pernicious effects of the Delta variant, and not just in Gauteng, but throughout the country. And so we're going to have to prepare ourselves accordingly to make sure that certain sectors and businesses are protected, particularly, as you say, given the damage that was inflicted by the last 12 months of the pandemic.
You talked, Mr. Kingston, about lessons learned from the previous waves. The government interventions that were put in place, TERS, etc., how impactful and effective were those schemes or those interventions?
Well, it took a lot of engagement with government and we as business alongside our social partners, particularly from labour and civil society, spent days, weeks and indeed months negotiating through the auspices of NEDLAC to ensure that we could extract as much benefit from UIF TERS, as you mentioned, for those who were impacted on by the pandemic and rendered temporarily jobless. And we think that there were not only millions of people, but families and those that were associated and supported by those who were employed, who benefited accordingly. We're going to have to go back to government to see whether or not there is more support that can be provided in the current circumstances.
There were a lot of blind spots in the sense that even now there are some employees who say they were due the UIF TERS, but they never got it. And so they suffered under the previous waves. What is going to be different this time around to make sure that all those who need to benefit from the affected sectors actually do so?
Well, you're absolutely right. There are many examples. We've brought as many of them as possible to the attention of government. They have to be worked through. Don't forget these cases individually, one by one. We have yet to agree the principle that we can find additional relief from UIF TERS or other sources within the fiscus for those employees. But when we do so, we're certainly going to make sure that the experience of last year is used as a reference point to ensure that those very poor experiences that you refer to, Tammy, are not suffered again in the current environment and in the current third wave that we're starting to experience, both in Gauteng and in the rest of the country.
You said earlier on that you were about to begin those discussions with government. What type of turnaround times are we looking at here? Yes, the initial lockdown for level 4 is for 14 days. It will be reviewed after that. But those who are affected, and should this go on for longer than 14 days, when do you think they can expect word from you and word from government as to what type of financial support they're going to be getting?
Yeah. Well, we can't speak on behalf of government. All we can do is approach government. We've already done that today. Obviously, we couldn't do anything until the president had spoken. We would hope that we can have our first initial engagements with government this week. But as we all appreciate, this takes time. I also need to emphasize that we're fighting numerous battles at the same time, because not only are we trying to resuscitate the economy from the ravages of last year, and I believe that we've made some progress in that regard, but we're having to lock down in the face of not just the third wave, and the very pernicious third wave in the context of winter, but we're trying to roll out as aggressively as possible the vaccine program at the same time. So we're going to have to make sure that we focus everybody's energies on what is critical. This area of relief for those sectors and businesses and individuals that are most affected is clearly critical, but there are other areas that will have to go, unfortunately, by the wayside for the moment.
It's the leisure-related industries and sectors that have been very hard hit from this lockdown level 4, at least impacted and affected. Should the country not improve as far as its daily rates of COVID-19 are concerned, and should there be an eventuality that we do actually go to a lockdown level 5, what would be your reaction as far as business is concerned with that, should that become an eventuality?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say I don't think, Tammy, that that's a realistic prospect. We have said that we think that even going to level 4 needs to be on an adjusted basis, and you will have seen again from what the President said that interprovincial travel is permitted, albeit not for leisure purposes, only for business-related purposes, and we would support that. We think that it is untenable and impractical to reimpose what was previously level 4 or indeed level 5. In the event that there are more stringent measures that are applied, and it's difficult to see what they might be, then of course we would need to revisit the level of support that government would be prepared to extend to those sectors that are most impacted. But I need to once again reassure your viewers that I think that's an unrealistic prospect currently, rather that we need to encourage absolutely everybody to stay at home to the extent that they don't need to venture outside, and to maintain all of the non-pharmaceutical interventions, which we know people have slacked off about over the past several months. I think that many people have become complacent, and that has indeed encouraged a much higher level of transmission than we had seen previously. Now that we're in the third wave, it's going to be very difficult to prevent it running its course. We can certainly dampen its effects by those measures, but more aggressive restrictions are unlikely to be able to achieve the primary objective, which is, of course, to alleviate pressure on the healthcare system, to safeguard people's lives and health, and to ensure that, to the extent possible, we keep the economy as open as is practically achievable.
Our understanding, Mr. Kingston, is really all that you've highlighted, the reasons why there is an adjusted lockdown level 4. There are some other industries, though, that seem to remain untouched. Industries that, when you look at them, seem to be very congested, a large number of people in very close proximity to each other, where there are very little controls as far as COVID-19 being able to spread in those environments. And mining is one such industry that comes to mind. Why is it that an industry such as that, for example, is not listed as one of those that expose individuals to the likelihood of COVID-19?
Well, I'm not actually sure that that's correct, because early on last year, we, under the auspices of NEDLAC, we established a whole series of standard operating protocols across all sectors in terms of what was necessary to keep any workplace open, not in any particular sector, across all sectors. And breach of those agreements is a breach of the law, with very significant consequences and ramifications. And I have no reason to believe that most sectors of the economy are extremely clear that they're going to abide by those particular protocols in terms of how people should behave. The very, as I said, non-pharmaceutical interventions that we've been talking about, including social distancing, wearing masks, sanitization, and the like. And that applies as much to mining as it does to the leisure industries. What is equally clear is that in many sectors, there were people who were in breach of the regulations. They were allowing far too many people into closed, confined spaces. They were not ensuring that there was adequate social distancing. They were not enforcing the KPIs that I've talked about or the non-pharmaceutical interventions. And I have to say that enforcement is one of the areas that we've raised with government as one of concern, that actually people who breach the rules should pay the consequences of so doing. And not just, by the way, in business, but across society as a whole, including marches, including rallies, including any other gatherings that are actually not permitted and were outlawed effectively from last night. Before last night, the limitation of 50 indoors and 100 outdoors was again being regularly breached, and there was not adequate enforcement. We hope that that will not be the case under the current lockdown arrangements.
Mr. Martin Kingston, thank you very much for your time and your insights this afternoon. Mr. Martin Kingston is chair of the Steering Committee for Business for SA.